Welcome back, everybody, for another episode of the Peer-to-Peer Policy Pod. I am Brian Morgenstern here with the great Sam Lyman, joined today by a special guest, House Majority Whip Tom Emmer. Congressman Emmer, thanks for being with us today.
To be with you.
So I'd like to start because news of the day, government funding. Are we going to fund the government? Are we going to have another shutdown? We have a friend in common, your former body man, Cannon Smith, who won the national championship at Clemson when he played, playing football, which meant he got to go to the White House to visit President Trump. One of those times was during a shutdown, which meant all non-essential staff was not there. There was no white glove service or filet mignon. It was, Dylan, can we throw up the graphic? It was hundreds of cheeseburgers from McDonald's, Wendy's, Burger King, leading to one of the most iconic photos in shutdown history, at least. I've lived through them when I worked for President Trump, the administration. I think Sam lived through them when he worked on Capitol Hill. So my first question to you is, are we going to have another cheeseburger palooza with President Trump looking like the patron saint of fast food? Or are we going to get something done? What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, we better not. That's all I have to say. I think we'll get the government funded within the next 2 weeks. It'll either happen this week or it'll happen right before the deadline next week. Senate's working on something right now that I think the Senate leader is going to tee up Thursday or Friday of this week. So theirs would be ready probably, if that's correct, by the beginning of next week. We are voting. I understand Mike announced it now publicly, so I can say we're going to vote on the 6-month with the SAVE Act. The SAVE Act is a bill that, frankly, 87% of Americans agree with. That means it's Republicans, Democrats, and others. That simply provides that only U.S. citizens can vote in U.S. Federal elections. So it passed the House back in July, so we've already passed it once, but this is something that we believe its time has come, especially with the 10 to 15 million illegals that have crossed our borders and are here in the country.
Well, we will see if you're right. And I want to circle back to the debt and spending discussion, but I want to run through a few other topics. Sam, I think you had another news of the day question.
Right. Yeah. So Whip Emmer, you have a really difficult job of corralling members of Congress to get this government funding bill passed. And in the backdrop, we have one of the most tumultuous elections possibly in American history. And you can really feel the volume being turned up to 11 with a lot of the rhetoric on the campaign trail. So over and over again, we hear that Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. And that culminated in the events of this last weekend of someone who really imbibed that rhetoric trying to assassinate Donald Trump on one of his golf courses. It's a wild scenario going on here in the United States right now. And I think you had a really interesting take on everything that happened over the weekend. Do you mind pulling up that tweet, Dylan? So here you say, it's unacceptable that we now refer to the assassination attempt against Trump. We have to clarify which one. He is the patriot of the 21st century. So that I love what you said. He is the patriot of the 21st century because it stands in such stark contrast to Donald Trump is a threat to democracy. So what's your take on the rhetoric on the campaign trail? And why is there such a huge disconnect between the elite's narrative about Donald Trump and how we, the people, talk about Donald Trump?
You know, it's interesting. I would go at it two ways. One, when it comes to the election, I believe the election, regardless of all of this noise that's out there, is going to come down to, are you better off today than you were when Donald Trump was actually in office and growing an economy before the pandemic? People have seen Donald Trump's administration create an economy for everyone. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden broke ours. They've seen Donald Trump seal the southern border and what that meant to peace and stability here in our country. Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have left the border wide open. You've got fentanyl deaths. You've got all of these tragedies, illegals committing rape and murder. And I mean, it's incredible. And the third one is people saw what peace and stability looks like around the world under Donald Trump. This administration has allowed Putin to advance on Ukraine, is trying to equivocate on the Israel issue, which you can't do. You can't just say Israel has a right to defend itself unless you're also saying Israel has the right to win this war. Donald Trump understands as a leader and has shown people. So the first piece I would say to you is that the personalities are going to go by the wayside. And the problem that I think you have in this country is not just the elites. It's this corrupt news media that they've been telling us for years their version of the truth and reality. Donald Trump has exposed them quite a bit over the last decade. And we're at a point now where journalists want to tell me, oh, we're the ones that you created the problem. You have been giving your agenda to the American people instead of reporting facts. I give you a quick example. Minneapolis paper over the weekend, the online version, right after the assassination attempt is reported. I go to the paper. Headline is still something about charter schools. I look at the banner up above. Does it say that there was a second assassination attempt on Donald Trump? No, it says Secret Service opens fire on man with gun at Mar-a-Lago.
Oh my God.
I mean, by the way, they also wrote a story in Minnesota like 2 weeks ago, even though the truth had already been reported 2 days earlier in St. Cloud, Minnesota by a local affiliate. They wrote an article for the main paper that said, essentially implied, didn't say because they obviously knew it wasn't true, that the Trump campaign stiffed the city of St. Cloud on the rally that they had. In fact, the Trump campaign had paid in advance, and any outstanding money was owed by the Secret Service, not by the Trump campaign. This kind of stuff, and they've been caught at it. So while I think the election itself, a lot of this noise is going to fall by the wayside, it's a very traditional pocketbook election that we've had. These guys here, they can't accept that. They're getting used to being on, they're for anything, even if they were against it yesterday, right? She suddenly is in favor of fossil fuels, fracking. She's never been in favor of that stuff, and the list goes on and on. I think the American public, I'll wrap it up, is just a lot smarter than these people give them credit for, these political elites. And I think they're going to show you that in November.
That's a good plug for alternative media. If you like what you're watching, hit like and subscribe. Follow us on social media at Morgenstern NJ, at Sam Lyman 33. You brought up energy. That's a great segue into Bitcoin and energy, since we are Bitcoiners. We talk about it all the time. The administration's energy department, Energy Information Agency, had tried to create, in essence, a registry of Bitcoin miners. They put out an emergency survey, which the emergency was ridiculous, where they were going to publish a bunch of the confidential business information of Bitcoin miners that they would use, based on White House statements, to limit or eliminate Bitcoin mining in the United States. Seemed to us to be coloring way outside the lines of their authority, so we brought a lawsuit. We won. But it seems like they'll just keep trying to do things, even though it seems to be illegal, because they don't seem to like our industry. You were a leader on the oversight efforts on this topic. So can you tell us your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, we did our little part, which was going right after the administration and the department, making sure that they understood you don't have a legal basis for what you're doing. And by the way, you use more energy based on some information that we were getting back at the time to print dollars. So this idea that this was a sincere attempt to deal with an emergency problem in this country, again, by this administration. We've seen this with Gary Gensler. And I don't mind saying it out loud. He's a liar. He just says that this is a security and we have the authority to deal with this. He's absolutely, he's the worst example of one of these leaders. But we did, and I would give you guys the bulk of the credit, get them to acknowledge, well, there's no emergency here. I think we're going to pull back. Here's the problem, and you guys know this as well or better than anybody, having been so close to the White House. They're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. They were caught. They had their hand in the cookie jar when we turned the light on, and they backed off. Or better yet, they had their hand in our pocket before we realized, wait a second. But that doesn't mean they're going to stop being the thieves that they are. So people need to be vigilant about this stuff. You need to be paying attention, because what's the next line of attack by these guys? They clearly do not like the digital age. They clearly fear the decentralization of all of this and the next generation of the web. I'm going to tell you, next Congress, a little off, but I am absolutely going to push legislation, especially if we have all three, the White House, the Senate, and the House, that would make our personal data that is generated from the internet, our use of the internet, our personal property. You can use it, but you got to ask me for it before you take it. You can't just take it. It's mine. If anyone's going to be compensated for it, it's you and me, not big tech. This is something that its time has come. When the internet was created, the idea was it was going to be this big decentralized tool. In fact, it's become incredibly centralized, and it's controlled by just a handful of big players in the marketplace, and that's causing a lot of problems.
Yeah, well, and Bitcoin, is sort of the anti-CBDC, and it allows people to custody their own assets, have control over their own financial autonomy. It's also very closely tied with the energy industry. Bitcoin mining is a flexible load, which can create more energy development, stabilize grids. So how do you tie the decentralized economy a little bit into developing the energy infrastructure that we need to power the economy of the future? This is something President Trump talks about.
Yeah.
I think every candidate should talk about it because it's such a critical issue.
Well, look, I start with permitting reform. What's happened over the last 30 or 40 years with the Clean Energy Act, with the Clean Water Act, these different federal do-good pieces of legislation, they've actually been turned around and used as a sword against people who are trying to advance these new ideas. We need major permitting reform in this country. We need to let people explore the minerals, the fossil fuels. By the way, batteries. We need to develop batteries that hold charge longer. We can do that in this country, but you got to free up the entrepreneurs and the innovators. You got to free them up in this country to do what we do best here in this country when it's not controlled by government. It's amazing what we can accomplish. But I'd start with permitting reform, and then I don't know if this is answering your question. We need to draw our government back and let people take chances. Let them make their own decisions about the risk and the level of risk that they want to take on, because that's where you get the greatest innovation, the greatest result. Yeah, are you going to have people who fail and maybe they lose everything that they had? Okay, well, that's happened throughout history. But the beauty of this country, unlike others, if you fall to the bottom of that prosperity mountain, you can pull your straps up and you can start climbing right back to the top of that hill without government telling you what you can and can't do. This opportunity goes way beyond Bitcoin. I give Bitcoin the credit for starting it, but this was a long time coming, right? It was the Keynesians versus the, those of us that were probably more Hayek type people, which, by the way, the Keynesians morphed into the modern monetary theorists. Oh, for God's sakes, it's like a cartoon.
Where the government can spend money to an unlimited amount, and it just is not going to.
There's formula. It'll be just fine. By the way, we can throw a rock in the air too. There's a formula, and it won't come down. That's just not accurate. But here's the biggest piece of that applies to not just Bitcoin, but everyone in the digital space. The government is like a legalized form of the mob, right? In order for you to be safe and secure, you got to pay the VIG. In order for you to do the things you want in this country, you got to pay the VIG, taxes, whatever that might be. They are scared to death. And this is where the Elizabeth Warren attitude comes from, of decentralization, because you know what it changes? It restores what this country was built on, which is by the people from the ground up, not from political nightmares like the senator from Massachusetts, who shall now not be named, that literally wants the top down. That's not what this country is based on. That's not our value. We need to make sure that we open this up. Permitting reform, bureaucratic reforms. You're going to have to reduce some of these agencies, and you're going to have to bring the financial legislation that's on the books. You're going to have to bring it into the 21st century. Why do we keep trying to shoehorn this new thing into something that we wrote starting in the 30s? This is a new world. We got to get caught up, and we got to get into the 21st century. And I'm excited because Donald Trump, who wasn't necessarily a great fan of the crypto environment and didn't understand, I don't think, because he wasn't getting the advice about how big this world is. Boy, has he come along and evolved.
Well, who would have thought you'd see Trump coming out for Bitcoin and then Elizabeth Warren being on the side of big banks and big government when she ran as the consumer protection candidate back in the day. But let me give some time to Sam. You have some great legislation that's in the hopper.
Yeah.
Take it any way you want.
We'll talk about legislation. And just while we're on the subject of the Native American senator from Massachusetts, let's talk for a second about CBDCs, because Senator Warren came out a couple years ago and made very clear that she is very pro CBDC. And Whip Emmer, I know that stands in stark contrast to your own position. You are very against CBDCs, so much so that you actually introduced a bill a couple years ago registering how much you were against CBDCs. Do you mind playing us that clip real quick, Dylan?
The Central Bank Digital Currency Anti-Surveillance State Act, which puts a check on unelected bureaucrats and ensures that the United States digital currency policy upholds our values of privacy, individual sovereignty, and free market competitiveness. Recent actions from the Biden administration have made it clear that they are not only itching to create a digital dollar, but they're willing to trade Americans' right to financial privacy for a surveillance-style CBDC.
Thank you, Dylan. So just in the few minutes that we have left, Whip Emmer, I'd love to ask you about, one, why CBDCs is an issue. Why did you recognize their danger, and how would you communicate that danger to the American public? And two, if you could tell us a little bit about your Securities Clarity Act as well.
Absolutely. In reverse order. The Securities Clarity Act, I would ask people just to go read the detail. But all you have to understand about it is twofold. We want to make it clear. Not every token is a security in the beginning, or it could be a security, and once the project is fully developed, it's no longer a security, right? That's the goal, but the other goal of it is to make sure that we stop writing these bills, giving more authority to federal bureaucrats to tell us what we can and can't do. I want the determination of whether something is a security or a commodity or cash. I want that to be the entrepreneur that is defining it and creating it, not Gary Gensler deciding that he's going to do it through enforcement and tell you, oh, you can do this one, but you can't do that one because I'm King Gensler. That's what the Securities Clarity Act is all about, ultimately. And anybody who knows Lizzie in my office knows that I have a bit of a chip on my shoulder with people embedded in these agencies and staff people who are, I'm going to write this law so that I may be working for the Fed in the future, or I may be at a law firm and you got to call me because I wrote the law. No, I want to free people up to do what they want to do. We should have the most minimal intrusion by government and bureaucrats we can possibly have. That's what the Securities Clarity Act and a bunch of the other legislation we've put in, that literally is the foundation of why, and we're addressing a specific problem. CBDCs, I was thinking about it while you were talking about it, because everybody is in agreement on my side now with this, and many on the Democrats' side are in agreement with this. But we were actually working on it before it was cool. I mean, after the Trump administration, the Treasury Secretary on his way out the door tried to make private wallets illegal. That's a mistake, and thankfully it did become reality. But then we had a bunch of Republicans who got out of the administration. You're not one of them. Who got out of the administration and started working for different entities. Deloitte is one that I remember. They want to be part of this central bank digital currency. Why? Because they see a fantastic money-making opportunity. The problem with this then And now, and it took a couple of years for all these people to figure it out. Back then, there were probably 2 or 3 of us when it started. You've got to let the free market apply. A central bank digital currency, we cannot allow this to happen in this country because it's happening all around the globe right now. What are these? For China and Russia and Iran, I would imagine, is going to be doing this as well. They're already doing it outside of the digital thing, but this is a ultimate surveillance tool, government surveillance tool. They will have everything about you. You think big tech is trouble? Imagine if Elizabeth Warren has access to every detail of your financial information through the Federal Reserve. She's going to. This is what you get with a central bank digital currency. The other thing you get is it allows countries like China, who are our adversaries. They are not our friends. It allows China to develop a misinformation vehicle at the same time. You start surveilling, you pull data, you do exactly what big tech does. Oh, I know what motivates him. I'm going to engage him, enrage him, and motivate him to do something. Go make a purchase. Go cause a problem. Go after his representative saying, this money that's going to Ukraine is actually going into this person's pocket or that person's pocket. This is the world that we're living in right now. I would rather see in this country, we need stablecoin legislation. And our friend Howard Ludnick talks about this all the time. We need to allow stablecoins to be created anywhere, not just here, but if they're going to be stablecoins that are recognized here in the U.S., they're dollar-backed stablecoins. We need to draft that legislation now because you know that the cab driver down in Brazil would love to be doing business in U.S. dollars, but he can't. You allow the creation of stablecoins, and again, I don't think they need to be created just here in the U.S. You can create them anywhere around the world as long as they are backed by U.S. dollars. And whatever regulation we have is the disclosures as to that, that reserve that is supporting that stablecoin. Aside from that, let them create it, let them spread it, let the world enjoy the same thing that we do, which is having the dollar to trade. I think that's the future, and if you do that, you grow that here. You don't have to have a government surveillance tool, and God forbid that this great experiment that was started 230 some years ago, God forbid that we would start to reverse what has happened over these last couple hundred years, which is we started with the idea that the power is in the individual to self-determine. We passed some of that power up to our local authority, our city, or our township, because we're living in a civil society. We're going to let them protect us. We'll give up some of our freedom for that. And then from the local authority, it got passed up to the county authority. And then from the county authority, it increasingly got passed up to the state. And then guess what? Our states over the last several decades have kept pushing that authority into the federal government so that now it's this huge, almost Death Star-like entity that controls everything. God forbid that the digital age, starting with the Bitcoin experience, would allow us to start to unravel that and return authority back to the state, back to the county, back to the local municipality, and ultimately back to you and me. That should be the goal.
Absolutely. I think you're in obviously friendly confines here, and I know you have to head out, but I want to just take all that full circle because we're operating something called the Bitcoin Voter Project to identify people who want this decentralized economy where individual empowerment is valued. We're identifying voters. They're typically younger. They're typically more diverse. They haven't necessarily picked a team yet. And voters, once they do pick a team, they oftentimes are brand loyal for the rest of their lives. So this seems like a really great opportunity to identify these voters and capture that spirit of freedom, of individualism, and the ability to control your own life. So what are you seeing on the campaign trail? Are these voters going to make the difference? I believe they're in the swing cohort and can go either way.
A lot of them.
But, you spend a lot of time getting reelected and helping other members getting reelected. So what are you seeing on the campaign trail?
I love what you're doing because I put this age group of voters in the 18 to 40 range, right? Because that group of people has grown up with the internet and in the internet. My generation had to learn it on the back end. And we're really good, most of us, at email, accessing some streaming, whatever. But we don't get into it, inside of it, the way these younger generations do in this country. The group that you just talked about, so I've said over the last couple of years, I believe the pandemic actually started in motion the next generation of libertarians in this country, because our young people are not fans of our politics. They're sick and tired of seeing people, oh, it's your fault. No, it's your fault. And nobody fixes anything. You realize my kids have never seen government work in their lifetime. The last time government worked, my oldest was born in 90. The last time government worked, I would argue, was under Ronald Reagan with Tip O'Neill, that it literally worked with the Congress and everything else. They've never seen that. So you've got a lot of younger people, and this would include the late 20s, 30s. They just weren't the same under the pandemic. The pandemic for these kids, the young 18 to 25-year-olds, those people were being told when they could go out, who they could associate with, the types of things they could do on holidays. I think that spawned this generation of libertarians, that they understand how serious too much government control is all about. I do believe the cowboy and cowgirl spirit is alive and well in this country. People still believe that their decisions should be their decisions. On the campaign trail, it's first off that. Second, they don't trust Republicans or Democrats who look like me, or maybe close to that. They don't trust us when we start talking about how we want to, put framework on their internet, because we're so concerned about all the dangers that we're going to try to protect them from. You put that libertarian spirit together with that, and what do you get? You get somebody who goes, hey, I'm not voting for that. You aren't going to tell me what I can and can't do. It goes to the most basic political argument we have. It's what we all say when we're 2 years old, as I know from raising 7 kids. One day when you're 2, you stand up and you tell your parents, you are not the boss of me. All right, well, this is just the adult version of you're not the boss of me. And I haven't seen you guys do anything productive during my lifetime. I'm going to own this. And I think you're going to have a lot of voters voting on this issue alone.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. That's that being borne out by the data that we're seeing. Well, listen, I know you got to run. Thank you so much for being with us today. We dove into a lot of topics. I hope our viewers respond, put comments, post your questions. We'll get into them in the post game or on our next episode. But House Majority Whip Tom Emmer, thanks for joining the show.
Thanks, guys. It's fun. Always fun.
Welcome back, everybody. We just wrapped our interview with House Majority Whip Tom Emmer. We covered a lot of ground. Sam, what were your key takeaways?
My key takeaways is that shout out to Tom Emmer for being ahead of the curve and being into Bitcoin before it was cool. He just has such a coherent understanding of what Bitcoin is and how it's a grassroots technology to restore power to the people. The way he was explaining at the very end where power originates, that it originates in the constituents, in the citizens of this country, and it bubbles up from there. I think that's what we have totally backwards in this country right now is people think that their rights come from the government. No. It's the other way around. Their rights come from their identity as, children of a creator, and they have God-given rights that are given to them. And I think that's where there's a real disconnect in our country right now on where rights originate from in the first place. And people who have this vision of CBDCs, for example, which he talked very eloquently about. I think people who are pro-CBDC have it backwards like that. They think that rights and privileges come from the government and nowhere else. And I think that's why our country is heading down a bad path right now. And I do believe we can correct course, though.
That reminds me of that recent dust up with Heidi Przyzbala of NBC, where she was kind of pointing an accusatory finger at a lot of, Trump supporters in particular, because they thought their rights came from God. And it's literally in the Declaration of Independence. It's like the basis of the United States. So it kind of illustrates what can be a disconnect between the mainstream media. The Whip touched on that, and ordinary Americans. A couple of other topics. One thing we didn't get to touch on was his piece of legislation, the Blockchain Regulatory Certainty Act, which is kind of the anti-Elizabeth Warren bill. He talked about how she favors a CBDC. His bill would enshrine the right to mine Bitcoin and to really, have these businesses function in America and have a future where individuals are empowered. We also talked about government spending. We ran out of time for talking about that, but this is a topic that Elon Musk talked about at the All-In Summit just a week or two ago, where he talked about moving government headcount off of government payrolls into the private sector and coming up with some fair way to do that. Probably has to happen. It will be a bit of a messy process, but I don't know. We've both worked in government. It seems like an insurmountable task to be able to shrink the size of government. How do we do that?
Yeah, that's one of the most difficult issues facing our country right now. And the problem is there's such an aversion to shrinking the federal bureaucracy, but it's so clear that that's exactly what we need to do. Just look at any CEO who takes over a troubled company. What's the first thing he does? He looks at inefficiencies within the company, and oftentimes he lays off a large amount of the staff, of the workers there. And that's not controversial in the world of business, but for some reason in the world of government, it is controversial. It's so clear that that's what needs to be done. A significant portion of the federal bureaucracy is not efficient, is not giving a return on the taxpayer's investment, and needs to be downsized. And President Trump, if he is the president, I think that's the next step, is finding a way to downsize the federal government. Schedule F is a potential option, but that's so clearly what needs to be done to return power to the people in the way that Whip Emmer was describing. What are your thoughts, Brian?
Yeah, I agree with all that. A couple of issues. One is what we've talked about on this show before, which is that defense, entitlements, and debt service alone put us in a deficit posture. So you really have to do pretty dramatic cuts. I actually liked Elon's take, which is, we care about government employees. We don't want to throw people out on their rear ends and totally upend their lives. But for the health of the country, we do have to be moving headcount from government to the private sector. And so I thought it was interesting that was his take. It wasn't just cut. It was, we're going to find more productive places for these people so that they can help the country grow, the private sector economy grow. I think that's a really good and optimistic way to look at it. And I think that's probably what has to happen. But lots of legislative prospects from that interview with Whip Emmer. Interesting insights on the campaign trail. We are in the midst of the presidential election. In the swing states now, there's controversy about all the illegal migrants coming into the country. How, if at all, will that affect the election? Are the Bitcoin voters or other swing groups going to affect the election? I don't know. Have you looked at any recent data, any predictions? Not going to hold you to them, but what do you see happening and what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, my trust is in Nate Silver. Nate Silver recently left 538 because he was disillusioned with the direction that his own organization was going in. And he seems to be pretty adamant that, at least when you look at the electoral votes, Donald Trump has a pretty clear path to victory. And last I checked, I think Nate Silver put his chances at about 60% of winning the electoral college. And so that in and of itself is strong evidence that Donald Trump really has a path forward. I also think there's a significant portion of the country that are silent Trump voters right now. I think there are fewer silent Trump voters than there were in 2016 and 2020 because the culture has shifted so much where people aren't as afraid to support him publicly now. So I think that's bullish for him as well. But again, you never know until the day of. But yeah, Brian, I know you're really connected with the campaign world. What are your thoughts?
I agree that based on the data we have today, it seems more likely that Trump gets elected president than Harris. But I have also kind of sworn off predictions because I've been wrong a lot. So I will agree that the data we have suggests that probability, not an not a definite, but that's the way things seem to be trending. In terms of Bitcoin and the digital asset industry, Trump has really come out in favor. The Harris campaign has been a lot more cagey about it. Our hope, of course, is that someday we have bipartisan consensus. But it really does seem like a live ball issue here, and around the margins, it can have an effect. The Senate map is looking very good for Republicans because the Democrats, frankly, have more seats to defend, so their resources are stretched more thin. The Republicans have pretty much an automatic pickup in West Virginia. That puts them in an advantage, which means it can be dealer's choice. They can pick up Montana, they can pick up Ohio, they can pick up Nevada, they can pick up Pennsylvania, pretty much any of the above, and the Republicans win the Senate. In the House, it's really strange. I think a lot of people don't really think about this. In the House majority really was won by Republican districts in blue states. So Southern California, Eastern Long Island, and upstate New York. So those battleground districts, I think, could potentially swing the House in states that if we're being honest, it's highly unlikely that Trump is going to win California or New York. But in those particular districts, that could determine who the next Speaker of the House is going to be. So those, really, the devil is in the details, so to speak, of those races. But we can spend all day going down the rabbit hole of data. Is there anything else you want to touch on, or go back to the Emmer interview before we wrap up?
I think that about covers it from my end, unless there's anything else from your end.
No, I think this has been a meaty and substantive podcast today. Thanks. I want to thank everybody for tuning in and remind them to like and subscribe. Send us your feedback. If you liked something or didn't like something, or you have questions, please engage with us. Follow us on social media at MorganSternNJ, at SamLyman33 on X. You can find us on, whatever, all the socials. Please do join us next time on the Peer-to-Peer Policy Podcast. Thank you to Rumble. Thank you to Dylan. Thank you to everybody here who has been producing this and getting eyeballs on it. Thanks for tuning in, and we will see you next time.